Welcome to this explainer. Look, if you have ever found yourself doubting the historical reliability of the Bible, you are definitely not alone, and you're in exactly the right place. Today, we're going to completely remove theology, remove the emotion from the equation, and just look at the objective historical data behind what is literally the most debated text in human history. We aren't asking if this book is divinely inspired. We're asking a strictly historical question. Does the New Testament reliably transmit the actual events it claims to record? Honestly, it is completely logical to doubt a 2,000-year-old document. I mean, think about it. If it's just copies of copies of copies, all made by hand over centuries, why on earth should anyone trust it without hard evidence? If you're skeptical right now, that skepticism is actually a fantastic starting point. Real historians don't just blindly trust ancient texts, and you know what? Neither should you. Okay, so here is our roadmap for this investigation. 1. Questioning the ancient text. 2. The manuscript explosion. 3. Reconstructing without the originals. 4. When enemies become witnesses. 5. Proof from the dirt. And 6. A verdict to consider.
All right, let's jump right into part 1, questioning the ancient text.
So to make absolutely sure we aren't giving this text any kind of special treatment, we're going to subject the New Testament to the exact same 3 academic tests that historians use to evaluate any ancient historical document, from Plato to Julius Caesar. First up is the Bibliographic Test, which basically asks, how well was the text transmitted? Second is the Internal Evidence Test. Were the authors actually eyewitnesses? And third, the External Evidence Test. Does outside historical evidence confirm their claims? Moving right along to Section 2, the manuscript explosion. Let's take a look at the physical paper trail, because this brilliantly highlights a pretty wild double standard in how we usually view ancient history. Take Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars, a universally accepted piece of history. It survives on just 10 manuscripts. Homer's Iliad, the absolute gold standard of ancient Greek literature, that has 643 surviving copies. But the New Testament, it possesses nearly 25,000 surviving manuscript copies across early languages. I mean, it's night and day. If you're skeptical of the New Testament's text, well, to be logically consistent, you'd kind of have to throw out almost all of classical antiquity. Now, time is the ultimate enemy of accuracy, right? The more time that passes between an original writing and its copy, the more room there is for human error. But check out this timeline. The earliest surviving fragment of the New Testament dates to around AD 114. That is within a single generation of the originals, which were written between AD 50 and 100. We even have nearly complete copies by the 4th century. Compare that to classical giants like Plato or Aristotle, where the gap between the original and the earliest surviving copy is often a staggering 13 to 1400 years. Okay, Section 3, reconstructing without the originals. So the manuscript data is overwhelmingly strong. But let's push the skepticism even further. What if, just hypothetically, every single one of those 25,000 physical copies just vanished tomorrow? Well, we'd actually have another entirely independent line of evidence. See, early Christian leaders quoted these texts incessantly in their own personal writings and letters. Just looking at the numbers from a handful of these leaders, there are over 36,000 separate quotations preserved entirely outside the primary biblical manuscripts. It's like an ancient, massive backup drive. Years ago, a scholar named Sir David Dalrymple challenged himself to see exactly how much of the text he could rebuild using only those external quotes. His conclusion was absolutely astonishing. He discovered that you could accurately reconstruct the entire New Testament, minus exactly 11 verses. Just 11! So even without a single original manuscript, the text basically survives intact. That isn't a matter of faith, folks. That's a matter of objective forensic evidence. Which brings us to Section 4, when enemies become witnesses. If you seriously doubt the text, you probably want to know what hostile outsiders recorded about it, right? People who literally wanted to destroy this movement. Let's start with Rome's greatest and most careful historian, Tacitus. Writing around AD 115, he viewed Christianity as a, quote, destructive superstition. Yet, in his official annals, he firmly corroborated the core execution event. He specifically names Christus, notes the execution happened under the reign of Tiberius, and even names the exact official who ordered it, Pontius Pilate. Then we have Pliny the Younger. He was a Roman governor around AD 112, and he was writing to the Emperor Trajan asking for advice on how to deal with these pesky Christians. This outsider's official report perfectly matches the internal descriptions of early Christian gatherings. He explicitly notes that they worshipped Christ as a god, reciting an antiphonal hymn, meaning singing back and forth to each other, and that they bound themselves to strict, legally binding moral codes against things like theft and adultery. Now, let's see how this aligns with the Jewish religious authorities at the time. In the Babylonian Talmud, which is a hostile text written specifically to discredit Jesus, they actually fully admitted he was a real historical person. They couldn't exactly deny the very public event of his execution, so they tried to explain it away by claiming he practiced sorcery instead. But crucially, they confirm he was executed exactly at Passover, precisely matching with the New Testament claims. And finally, there's Lucian of Samosata. He was a 2nd-century Greek satirist who relentlessly mocked Christians. But stacking these independent accounts back to back shows something amazing. Even pagan satirists who absolutely despised the early church completely validated its foundational historical facts. He confirms a real man was crucified and that his followers worshipped him and lived by his ethical laws. It turns out the enemies of the text actually verify the text. All right, Section 5, Proof from the Dirt. So, we have the paper trail, and we have the hostile witnesses, but for a true forensic investigation, we've got to examine the tangible, physical proof. Like a lot of skeptics, Sir William Ramsay, who was one of the greatest archaeologists of the 19th century, was utterly convinced the New Testament book of Acts was a complete fabrication. He actually traveled to Asia Minor specifically to disprove the text's geography, but the physical evidence he dug up forced him to reverse his position completely. He found that the places, the titles, and the political structures described in the text were casually, yet stunningly accurate. And century after century, archaeological discoveries have continued to challenge critical assumptions. For years, skeptics doubted Pontius Pilate even existed until 1961, when an ancient stone was unearthed in Caesarea confirming his exact name and his title as prefect. Critics used to claim the Pool of Bethesda, with its 5 porticos or covered porches, was just a symbolic myth. That is, until archaeologists actually dug under Jerusalem and found the exact 5-sided structure. Skeptics even argued that Romans didn't use nails for crucifixion until 1968, when the remains of a crucified man named Johanan were discovered in a bone box, with a massive Roman nail still driven straight through his heel bone. Finally, Section 6, a verdict to consider. We have objectively run the tests here. We set aside personal beliefs to look strictly at the cold, hard data. And from nearly 25,000 manuscripts, to hostile Roman and Jewish records, down to ancient stones literally pulled from the dirt, this stands out as the most robustly attested document of the ancient world. The sources show the history is reliable, the text itself is highly secure, and outside, hostile witnesses independently corroborate the story. Which brings us to the ultimate point of this explainer. The forensic evidence demands a verdict, and we're leaving the ball entirely in your court. Think about it. If the text accurately recorded the history, the geography, and the execution with this much precision, it kind of forces us to grapple with the rest of its claims, doesn't it? So now that you know the facts, what will you do with this information? Keep questioning, keep digging, and hey, thank you so much for learning with us today.